So before DBT, we have now a current project that we want to do big data and bring all the data. What were we doing until today before we have this whole infrastructure of DBT? So we all know the ETL, the extract, load, transform model, which brings the data. The data can be in an external sources out of my company. It can be microservices within my company. And all of this data I now want to bring into my data lake, enrich it, transform it, and then save it and persist it either to a data lake, a data warehouse, or any other database. So this is the standard way that we're doing things, and there are a lot of tools that help us with this, like Fivetran and Stitch. DBT is now coming in and saying, we want to change. This has to be changed a bit. So before we drill in, a few words about me. I'm Chaim Turkel. I'm a group leader at Tikal. Tikal is a company that we are of tech experts, and we help out and we go into different companies. Currently, I'm with Yotpo, and the project that I'm going to show you is a joint project that I'm doing with Yotpo. So a few words also about Yotpo. What do we do with Yotpo? So Yotpo is an e-commerce market where we help our clients to be engaged with all of their clients through all sorts of SMSs or emails and enhance the connectivity between them. So just to give an idea of all the different things that we have to do in Yotpo, these are the numbers of developers, analysis, data pipelines, and data stores. Now with these numbers, you would ask yourself, what is the size of a data platform team to support 450 pipelines, 30, 40, 50 data stores? How many people do I need? Well, what do we have at Yotpo? About 7 or 8. So how do we do this? Part of what we're going to show here with DBT is how we manage with fewer developers to bring a platform for the whole company so that the whole company can do it. So before DBT, what did Yotpo do? Yotpo has an open source, you can also look it up on the internet, which is called Metadata. There are all sorts of, each company also tries to do similar solutions, and the solution that was done at Yotpo is we take Spark, because in the end Spark is what's going to do all the transformations, and we create another level of abstraction. We have here a YAML file, you write your SQL statements, your sink, your source, and then you run the Metadata, deploys it on Spark, and it writes all the answers into your data lake, your data warehouse, and wherever you want it. The major disadvantages of systems like the Metadata is each pipeline is very singular. I'm a programmer, I write my pipeline, I write the Airflow DAG that runs it, and that's where all my work begins and it ends. What happens if my pipeline fails? Who does it affect? What are the connectivities between the pipelines? We don't know. In other words, what we're mainly missing is lineage, which we will see in DBT. So I think all these utilities, if we compare them to DBT, it's like comparing a company that uses all sorts of small boxes to try to fit things in their box, and now I want to move into a full library. I know what books are, I know exactly which, on which folders they are, on which, all different places, and now DBT is going to organize my life. And that's what we hope to show. So an overview of the architecture in Yotpo, and this is a fairly standard architecture, I think, in most companies. We have all our external sources. We have Absolver and Stitch to bring in all that data and write it into our S3. We have the area of the Metadata, which were replaced with DBT, which reads the S3 files, creates the models, recompiles them, transforms them, and then writes it back to S3. And then we have the whole world, which is the northbound of the whole data lake, where we have all sorts of other systems, which Looker is one of them, and we will show also what we've done with some of those tools as well. So what is DBT? DBT was founded in 2016. The traction is very fast with DBT, as we see the numbers of the companies that are using it. And it's important also to say there's DBT Core and DBT Cloud. DBT Cloud is the hosting of DBT. I will not be discussing or referencing the cloud. If you want to look there, you can look. We're mainly focused on the DBT Core, which is an open source. And I think the most impressive number is actually the number of the Slack members and the community. The community of DBT is very big, it's open source, and they have a lot of information there. So anybody that's going to start using DBT, you have to go in the community and to start reading the things, and it helps out a lot. So what is the concept behind DBT? The concept is if we started from ETL, from extract, load, and transfer, extract, transfer, load, DBT comes and changes it around. They say take your raw data, load it into your data warehouse, and then transform everything. By doing this, they've also taken another step of using SQL as their base for everything. So a lot of people, it's much more available for them to be writing with SQLs than starting to write Spark jobs or all sorts of other platforms in different languages. A lot of people know SQL. Now, another thing that's important to say, DBT is a core library, and then it has adapters. So you have adapters for Snowflake, for Databricks, for Redshift, for all sorts of different things, for BigQuery, and they're constantly adding it. But the way the architecture is built is you have the core that does all the transformations, and then you have adapters that do the actual writing to the databases or data warehouses. So here what we're going to do is look at a standard project of DBT and to try to see the different parts within a project. So the first I would say is seeds. Seeds is another concept with DBT. I want to import into my database all sorts of tables, usually small tables. They might be currencies, they might be dates, and I want them versioned. I want them part of my Git. Again, also part of the whole idea is to take all sorts of engineering practices and bring it into our world of data. So everything I want in Git, I want versioning, I want to know what's happening, I can do that with seed files. Then we have the models, which obviously the models is the major part of DBT. It's consisted of SQL files, which is the SQL that I will actually write. And we will dive in a bit to each type of file and see what they look like. For each SQL file, you also have a YAML file, which describes the SQL and gives extra metadata about the SQL so that DBT can then infer information and add it to the documentation. And if we said documentation, then DBT also has a whole system of documentation where you put your documentation in markdown files and you reference them in your models. And this way, I don't have to repeat myself and duplicate all the documentation, but I link to it. And then finally, we have the DBT packages and macros. DBT is SQL files in combination with Jinja templates. So by using Jinja templates, they managed to do all sorts of added things. And the DBT packages is similar to pip packages. These are packages that are community open source. You can download them. By adding them to your packages, they get downloaded by DBT, and then you incorporate them into your project, and you can use them as part of your system and solution. So we have here a sources file. Again, we come to a system. We have data already in the warehouse before I've modeled it, but I want to use those tables in DBT. So we have here the sources at the top, and then we have here, as you can see, the name of the table, the description, in which schema is the table sitting, and all the different tables and all the columns that I have about that I'm describing about source tables. We'll also notice an area of tests. In DBT, I can say I want to test this column. This column has to be, and this is a source table. It's not even my table. Before it comes into the system, I want to say it has to be unique, and they're not allowed to be nulls. And DBT will run an SQL statement to validate this, and if it doesn't pass, then the DBT pipeline will fail. SQL. This is an SQL file. It looks very similar to standard SQL, but one of the major differences, as we see, is the Jinja template of sources. How do I reference a table? I don't write the actual table of database.table, but I use a function called ref. And this is more or less the magic sauce behind the DBT. Once I use a ref function, it then knows to connect the two models. It knows that one model is based on the other because I told it, I'm based on this model. So they don't have to start parsing and inferring and understanding, but I'm telling DBT the connections between the models, and then it generates the full lineage of all my models. For the same file for the SQL, I now need to give it descriptions. I'm adding all the documentation for this SQL file. Again, column, the name, tests. We'll see here tests. I can write these tests in any level that I want. whether it be at the source file or different stages in the middle or at the very end of my pipeline, I can also run tests. As far as the type of tests in dbt, there are 4 basic tests that dbt comes out with. You have the unique, you have the not null, and you have relationships. As we also know, in big data, we don't have foreign keys between tables, so we still want to validate that the connection between the tables and the data are there, so dbt can run the relationship and validate that the data is still connected between the tables. And the last type is accepted values. If I have a column that's an enumerator, I can validate that all the values that are in there are the values I'm expected, and this way my report won't crash because there's some sort of value that I didn't expect, and I can test it from the beginning. Once I've done all of this, I've written my SQLs, I've written my YAML files, I've brought all of this into one place, I can now create what's called a documentation. What dbt does behind the scenes, and we'll see it also a bit later on, is it takes all the information and it crunches it into 2 different files. One is called a manifest and one is called a catalog. These are JSON files that describe your whole system of all the different models. It then generates a static website. This is a data catalog that I can then host within my company, and anybody that's looking for information can go to this catalog and find it. We'll see here the descriptions, we can see the actual SQL, and all sorts of information that we have, and we get this because people enter at the right time the information. Data catalogs that we have to add the documentation after the pipeline is written is very hard to actually add the documentation. It's like testing. You don't write the tests after the code, you write the tests with the code, and it's all in the same Git system. And last but not least, we have lineage. We have here the whole idea of lineage. You can click into it, you can zoom, you can filter, and it gives you all your models and the connections between them. So let's summarize more or less what we have with dbt and what dbt gives us. So we have the ability to import existing data in our warehouse into the dbt model. We have the ability to transform these different models. And we'll also notice that by saying that I can import existing models, it also gives me the ability to incrementally add the dbt into my company. I don't have to say we have to replace everything, but we can replace things slowly. We can add the dbt for the new tables and then slowly migrate all the old ones into the dbt system. In addition, we have the ability to separate, just like we have in a data lake. We have the silver, bronze, and gold strategies. Also in the data warehouse through dbt, and by the way, this is a solution that is suggested by the community of dbt. This is not our invention, and therefore, as I said, the community is very vibrant and worth reading, where I separate also all my different models into sourcing, staging, and marts, in similar to what we do in a data lake. Documentation is part of my repo, it's built in, and of course, we have the lineage. So now that we've covered most of the things in the dbt, or at least highlighted the major features, what's missing? To begin with, we're missing the generation of the source files. If you remember what I showed you of the YAML, all of that YAML has to be written. I have some sort of database in my warehouse. I have to look it up. I have to write a very tedious work of filling in this whole YAML with all the different columns that exist there so that I can then use it in dbt. If we add columns, remove columns, somebody has to all the time update this information. This is something that's missing from dbt. In addition, we also have Forever SQL, we have a YAML that describes the SQL. Well, what happens when I change the SQL? Who's going to update the YAML? How do I write the YAML to begin with? Again, it's a lot of tedious work, and at least as programmers, we don't like tedious work. Another thing that we have, we're not going to go into it into depth, but also I want to try to understand what's missing and how we can take dbt forward. dbt does not discuss scheduling of the models. How do I run the models? What happens if I want models run at different times? Some once a day, once an hour, once a week, at the end of the month. All of this dbt does not give you. That's something you have to do by yourself. dbt Cloud covers some of it. But these are things that we at Yotpo decided is very important for us. In addition, I've now created hundreds of models. I start getting lost in this whole forest of different models. So we need to organize it, and we want it organized from day one. So from day one, we want to invent something that's called a domain. This is not enforced by DBT. It exists also in their documentation in the community that it's a good practice. So we want to try to encourage it within Yotpo that all the models will be separated by domains. Another reason for the domains is we want to use the data mesh concept, and we want to move ownership as much as possible to the people that are writing the models. And as you will see, as part of the self-serving platform, the whole idea is we give you a platform, you write your pipelines from end to end, and you're responsible then from end to end, from writing the SQL to the running of the pipelines on Airflow, including monitoring and all sorts of other things. We've also enhanced the whole idea of the documentation. DBT gives you the ability to write a placeholder for each document and put the document in the metadata file, in a markdown file. But sometimes that same field appears in a lot of different models. How do I make sure that the same documentation appears in each one? This is a whole area that's also missing in DBT. So what is Yoda? Yoda, to begin with, is Yotpo Data Applications. This is a utility. It's a Python REPL that we created, and the whole idea behind it is to facilitate all the different programmers that are going to now use and create our data models, and to help them with their daily process in order to speed them up, and also to give them a full self-service from end to end. So as you can see here, we have a lot of verbs that you can run within the CLI, and we'll have a small live demo for this to show it actually in working. But when I want to create a model, I will type in create. I don't have to right-click, create a new file, and start filling everything in, but I want to template it. I want to start out with some basic template that I can already use and then change and filter. I want to be doing a lot of extra things, and this is where Yoda comes in. So what have we added in the basic versions of our Yoda? When I also want to run DBT, DBT has 100 models. If you just do DBT run, it will run the full 100 models. But I'm currently working only on 3 or 4 or 5 models. I don't want to run all of them. So DBT says, fine, no problem, do DBT run and specify which models you want to run, which means I always have to write explicitly what are my models. Did I remember them? Did I forget them? So with Yoda and with the help of Git, we know exactly which models you've changed. I know to compare your branch to the master, figure out all the different models that you're currently working on, and when you do run, it will run only those models for you. In addition, we have the ability to give you a development environment. In the previous platforms like Metadata and other ones, if you're running on Spark, you need a whole cluster. How do I do that just for my environment? Once I've moved into the world of data warehouses and I have DBT, I can also now, with macros of DBT, create my own environment. So all the tables that I need, I don't run against production. I get them in my environment. I test my models in my environment. And only in the end do I publish them to the production. An interactive tool, as we will see, that will help facilitate and create the models for me, so I do less mistakes. In addition, DBT has a whole section of metadata. You can add metadata to any place that you want in the models, and it will save it and display it within the documentation. We use this area of metadata for scheduling. Every model you specify with a cron expression when you want it to run. And with that, we will then use in the later stages with Airflow. You also will specify which team. So if I see a model that I want to use with my model, but I don't fully understand it, I know who I can turn to. By looking in the documentation, I will see who owns this model, who I can talk to, and if something fails with it, they will get an alert for them in their systems. And that's the monitoring and alerts by saying, once you specify that I'm the specific team, all my models that I've created, I will get in my Slack channel anytime an Airflow falls, because I have all this metadata and I know what's happening. So what we're trying to do here also in Yotpo is to bring a self-service end-to-end. And when we mean end-to-end, and also I'm looking in the vision in the future, We obviously have this whole idea of the domain and documentation area where we import sources. We have our staging in our marts, which of course have the SQL and all the metadata. dbt generates from this the manifest and the catalog. Based on this, we can now in Yoda start enhancing all sorts of other features and all sorts of external systems. So whoever who knows Looker, Looker is a reporting system that you also have to model all your data. So you end up modeling your data twice, once in your warehouse and once in Looker. We don't want to do that. So we want to add metadata and automatically generate for Looker all the information. The same with Airflow. We don't want people to have to write Airflow DAGs for every pipeline. We want them automatically generated. So based on the manifest and all the information, I can generate code for Airflow, deploy it in Airflow, including, as we said, alerts and monitoring and scheduling. And all of this is done based on the metadata. And of course, Hashamayim Magvul. We can continue, the northbound can continue in a lot of different things. So what is the platform that we are trying to bring? For starters, we want zero installation. I don't want people to have to install Python. Which version of Python? Do they have the proper pip version installed? Did they download my version? They call and tell me, look, your CLI isn't working right. By me it worked, by you it didn't work. We don't want to do that. So we're going to be using code spaces that I'll show you in a minute, and we're using Docker. Everything is installed in a Docker, pre-installed, and then hosted on code spaces. And of course, everything is based on Python. This is a view, and now we're going to go in a minute into the demo. But this is a view of how it looks in the code spaces. During the demo, I will talk and explain what we're going to do is a standard flow. I'm now a new team. I want to create new models. I want to create a new domain. I want to import sources. I then want to create, by the way we also do it is every time you import a source, you also create a stage for that source. So in that place, you can then change the names, drop columns that are internal and only external other different columns. And then you do another layer for the mart that might be a join with other tables and then externalize it. So now for my live demo, my very nice assistant here will help. So here, this is a recording of a demo that I did this morning. I'm opening up here Git. We're going into code spaces, and I'm opening up a code space that I had already created. Again, no installation. This is all in the web. And now it's going to connect, bring up my Git, VS Code, for those that managed to notice it. And here in the terminal, we're going to have our CLI that is going to come up in 1 second. And now I can start working. So the first thing I'm going to do is create domain. And it's going to ask me, okay, what's the name of the domain? So we're going to do big things. We'll notice it automatically creates folders. We are opinionated of how these folders should be and where we want to put things. So we have all the different folders for our source, staging, and marts. And this already tells people how you're going to organize all your different things. Now we want to fetch a source. So we do fetch sources. So we're now importing sources. This is going to our data warehouse. In our case, it's Databricks. And it's now going to load all the different names of all the databases that we have. I'm importing SMS, and now it's going to tell me in this database what are the tables. It's giving me a list of all the tables. I'm importing a table. We'll notice I misspelt it. It says misspelled, give them the right one. And now it's going to add a table called users. It automatically generated the whole sources as we saw with documentation templating that we are opinionated, again, using dbt of how to do it. And it already comes with a staging file and YAML with all the different columns and all the information already up and ready to go. So you didn't have to do anything except for 2 or 3 commands. Now what we're going to do is we're going to write the next stage, which is the mart. I'm now going to say I want to create a new model. It's going to ask me what type of model do you want to create. For starters, I need to say which domain. I want a mart. I'm going to call it also here a task users. And this is going to be on top of the previous one that we did. So also here, I don't have to start from scratch and type everything in, but we have a template. So I need to change the ref to be using what I want. I need to give here in SQL some sort of name and which columns do I want. In this case, I'm just going to do star just for the demo, but usually you want to do all sorts of transformations. And notice I'm going to say run. I didn't tell it what to run, what not to run. And we'll notice that the YAML is empty because I just wrote a new SQL with no information. It already figured out exactly what I want to run. And this is based, of course, on the fact of Git. I know which files have been changed. So it's going to run these two models. And when it finishes running the models, it's going to fill in this whole YAML with all the information based on the SQL because it goes to the warehouse using dbt and figures out what it needs to do. So we'll wait a second for the actual model to run. And again, the whole concept is we'll see how things are very, very simple once you add another layer on top of dbt. So we've run our models. And we'll look at the YAML here. And we'll be able to see it's all filled in with already placeholders for your documentation. What's left is to just go and fill in your documentation and add them. Of course, I also want to see the data. So I'm going to say, show me the data. I would like to see it. I don't want to see all the data. So the default here is we'll see it's taking from my personal space, and it's only going to limit for 10. Of course, you can change it. And here I open, and you can already see the data and view all the different things within my personal terminal without doing anything else. Not only that, I want to see how the documentation looks. And this is one of the parts that dbt actually takes the longest. When you generate documentation, it's building the full manifest, the full catalog. And again, I'm in my small development environment. I've added a few models. I've written up my documentations. Before I publish it, I want to see how it's going to look. Again, no installation. This is code spaces. It's now going to build the catalog. In a minute, we'll see it's going to open it in another tab based on my schema and everything, the full documentation site of dbt. And we'll give it a minute to show. While it's opening, we can also see here their targets. You can specify in dbt whether you want your target is production or whether it's dev environment and have different environments. Now it's finished and it's starting the web server. מה לעשות? לא, זה סרט. And now in a second, it will open up the website. In this website, we have the big things that we just saw with all the different descriptions. Again, they need to be updated, of course. All the information about the model that I just added now. And we have a button here for lineage, where we can see the lineage that we just created. לחזור למצגת. So now looking forward, what else do we want to add in our journey of the dbt and the Yoda that we want to still add? The whole idea of unit data testing we haven't done yet. Of the testing means that I have now a model. I want to set what are the import tables for this model. Data testing is not that simple because I have 5 or 6 tables with different connections, foreign keys, primary keys. All of these need to be set up just for me to run my model and then compare it with some sort of expected result. So this is an area that we're going to be looking into. In addition, the northbound that we discussed, I want to export from my warehouse. I don't need everything always in the warehouse. I might need to export it to Elastic, to Amplitude, to Kafka. All these are different things that where the idea is in the metadata, you will describe this model, I want to go to Kafka. This model needs to go to Elastic, and it'll be all self-service for the user from end to end. LakeFS, which are also here in the crowd. There's a very, very big problem in dbt, I have to say, which they don't really actually mention it that much. The way the testing in dbt works is I run my model, and then I run the tests. Let's say I have a test that says not null. So the test fails. It tells me, yes, you have a problem with the data, but my data is already in production. So what am I supposed to do now? So yes, I know I can try to fix it, but I've already published it to production. So idea is to take LakeFS and to create a transaction. And again, LakeFS is a Git-like system where we create a branch when we're going to do dbt run and then dbt test for each model. If it finishes, then we will push and merge that branch into master. And we can also use this for different levels of transactions. If I want to have a whole DAG that only when it fully finishes, only then do I want to push all that information. In the end, it will come down to metadata that you put in your models, where you more or less say what are the boundaries of the transaction. And behind the scenes, Yoda, with the generated airflow, will call LakeFS and create all these transactions. Streaming is also a whole issue that we're getting into. dbt is batch-based, but through all sorts of different types of databases like Rockset and Materialize and other ones, you can also start doing streaming with dbt. So that's another area that we're going to be looking into. So if we summarize, what are we trying to show here? For starters, dbt is a great tool. Even without Yoda, I suggest very much that you start using dbt. Very easy to create models with it. You get documentation, lineage, a very good community. The Yoda platform here that we're describing, that we've done in Yotpo, we hope in the future to push it as an open source so that everybody can use it. But for the ideas that you can also take to your different companies, is we try to also supercharge your time to market. We want you to be able to very easily write your pipelines and to be able to do from end to end, from the beginning of a pipeline all the way to the end. So me as a user, and we actually have a full flow. You write your model, you commit it, the CI/CD generates all the metadata, publishes it to Looker. I can look at my views and reports and see how everything is going to be before I even publish it to production. I then publish it to production. It automatically gets deployed to Airflow, including already all the systems of the scheduling and monitoring and alerts. So thank you very much. You can follow me on Twitter. There I'll be publishing also more things as we go along with dbt. And if there are any questions. Yes?
When the model runs, where does
just
it
a bit
run?
louder.
When the model runs, where does it run specifically? On the same database where I keep my data, or is dbt like its own deployment?
dbt doesn't do the actual heavy lifting. dbt sends the SQL statement to your warehouse. As I said, there's a core of dbt and there are adapters. So each adapter, let's say it's Redshift, I'll send the query to Redshift and Redshift runs the actual query. dbt just synchronizes it and sends the commands to the different warehouse. Any other questions?
Yeah, question from home. How long did it take to develop Yoda?
For starters, it's in progress. We're always adding it. We've been working on Yoda for approximately half a year. And again, this is a project depending on how wide you want to do it. You can do it shorter, you can do it longer, and there's always more to add. It's a very big project.
Is there integration with current data catalogs?
dbt itself has integration with other catalogs. Most of the catalogs there know how to import from dbt. And if there's anything missing, it's very easy to actually add, but most of them already read dbt. As I said, dbt is very, very popular. If you start reading and looking and you look dbt, data warehouses, all of them are starting to support. Databricks supports dbt, Snowflake is supporting dbt. It's becoming a very big trend.
If you're streaming, for example, from Kafka to Snowflake, who is doing the
In this case, you're connecting different systems. So I might have a Databricks system that's doing all the modeling, and then I publish through Yoda to Kafka. Then that Kafka, again, depending what we're doing, why you want it in Snowflake. We're also, some of our ideas is to publish directly to Snowflake. And then you might have in Snowflake another segment of dbt that does the modeling within Snowflake.
I'm not talking about Yoda, I'm talking about DBT.
dbt also. You can do dbt with Databricks. Again, DBT doesn't know how to export anything to Kafka, but let's assume that you write your own Kafka producer and consumer that copies the data from Databricks to Snowflake, and then you write another DBT project on Snowflake that does all the modeling over there.
How stable and reliable is DBT? Do you use it for production and critical flows?
Yes, it is very stable and very, in the end, DBT itself is not, as we said, is not doing the heavy lifting. So if I have a query that's failing, I'm going to go to my data warehouse and see what the failure is. If my failure is that I wrote an incorrect SQL, that I'm going to already find in my CI/CD. Most of the failures usually end up being in the actual data. That's the biggest and hardest part, is how do I do data quality and data testing. And that usually has nothing to do with DBT. That's the data itself. But the DBT core, I would say the biggest and hardest part is the scheduling. Out of the box, you have no scheduling for it. That needs to be added.
I still don't understand.
Maybe it's a question.
Maybe it's because I'm from Chicago.
No, that's not the reason.
If I have my data in, for example, parquet files in S3, and I want to write a job of enriching my data from another source, how can I use DBT, and who's going to do the heavy lifting?
DBT works with data warehouses. There's a version of DBT that also works with Spark. You have a Spark adapter. So if you have a Spark cluster that runs, or you can use Databricks, that runs with the S3, then DBT knows how to send all the commands to Spark, and all of it's done in Spark. So it's either data warehouses or Spark.
Hi, there's another question from the chat. So how many engineers were involved in the development of Yotpo?
3 plus, again, we have a bit of help for team leaders and architects, but actual programmers, 3.
Is it going to be outsourced?
Yeah.
Open sourced? Yes. Definitely. Any other questions?
I have a question about the integration with Airflow.
Just a bit, yes.
First of all, we create those DAGs dynamically. Those DAGs will be stored in some repo, right? Just add them to other repo.
We have a CI/CD that reads all the DBT, runs the whole DBT. Again, the whole CI/CD, we can do a meetup just on that of how to do it. There are a lot of different components in the Yoda and the whole system, but part of it, we generate the DAGs within our Yoda system. Those DAGs are published in S3 bucket, and that gets synchronized to our Airflow.
And then how do you run those Airflow?
The Airflow monitors the bucket, and it loads it automatically.
No, the DBT, they run on the...
The DBT, here it depends on what platform you're going to run it. We're currently running on Databricks clusters. So here it's more, we're using Databricks job cluster. So the technology is more, in the end, you're running a command of DBT run. The bigger question is does the cluster allow you? So Databricks instance has an interactive cluster and a job cluster, and it's different of money. So here you have to check each technology, does it allow an external system like DBT to connect to it on the lower cost job clusters. But otherwise, the Airflow itself just runs the command of DBT run with a connection to Snowflake, for instance, and each task in the Airflow will run it through into Snowflake.
Hi, people, I really want to see Yoda out there. So people are asking if there is an EPA for when you
That,
open source.
Doron.
Yeah. Get back to you.
But we will try to keep the community updated also with our ideas and the things that we were doing. And we'll have to see of a time frame, definitely.
We'll start working on it in the next few months. It's a short term.
Thank you very much.